Hi, everybody. Welcome to Equip Night. We are so excited you're with us. Tonight, we're doing something really, really special. We are taking a month to talk about what it means to be a force for God. So, we've talked about it all February, and I'm super excited for us to discuss this going into March. Part of the reason why is because Easter's coming up. Easter's April 4th. For those of you who do not know, Easter is probably the most important holiday for Christians, more important in many ways than even Christmas. And so it's this amazing holiday, and we get to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And so tonight, in light of Easter, in light of us as a congregation family talking about what it means to be a force for God, my desire is to do a men's edition. So what does it mean to be a force for God as a male? And so next week we're going to do a woman's edition. And so we're going to talk about what it means to be a force for God as a female. And we're also, after that, we're going to do it for families. And so every week I'm having a new guest. And so this week, Brandon Dalton is my guest, and I could not be more excited to talk to him. I feel like whenever me and Brandon talk, we really nerd out. And I feel like we get into the weeds of what we're talking about. We get to the bottom of the issues. And so that's what tonight's about. So if you're a woman, you're going to enjoy the heck out of this. If you're a man, you're going to enjoy the heck out of this. What does it mean to be a force for God as a male? And how to be a man who is a force for God, how to think about that, how to grow as a male. But I think that there's going to be so many amazing nuggets in here that is going to encourage women who are single, women who are married, women who have been married for a long time. They might be nudging their man. Tonight they'll have a lot of fun. So Brandon Dalton is my guest, and I could not be more excited for him to join me. Brandon, good to see you.
You too, buddy. What's going on?
Nothing much. Every time I see you, you are always better dressed than me.
Man.
When you're not in graduate school getting your PhD, we got to go shopping.
Man, I tell you, I get dressed up. My wife will tell you, I get dressed up just to go take the trash out.
That's a good thing, because a lot of dudes don't do that, and I think as a dude, it's a good deal to like look good.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a really good. I almost want to call it discipline, because no,
go ahead. It is.
Yeah, because even if you're not into it, because a lot of dudes aren't, I still think being disciplined about it, taking care of self-care, looking good, learning about it, I just think it helps you in every domain of your life, whether it be looking great for your significant other, or whether it be, looking good at work, maybe leave the sandals in the closet and go out and buy some good sneakers. And so you're always dressed to the nine. So I always gotta up my game when I hang out with you.
I'm telling you, I haven't met a man that if he has on some very nice looking shoes, he walks different. If he's dressing the part, he might even talk different, but it does something to feel good inside and out. Plus the expression is a glory to God. I mean, we only have one body. So to come through this lifetime dressed your best for him, I think is a glorious thing.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about what it means to be a force for God as a dude, and kind of pick your brain about it. And it's funny because, like, just being 31, I'm turning 32 March 18th. Kudos to me. It's crazy. I'm not like a birthday person, but it's weird that in about a week I'll be 32. I feel like conversations that I have with a lot of dudes, really in their 20s and 30s, but it's wild almost at every level of age, how much gender kind of comes into the conversation, particularly for men, I think, just because I can speak as a male. And, whenever you step up in your life or even in faith, I think a part of that has to do with you being a guy and working through a certain set of issues. A lot of people don't know this, but like statistically speaking, the church is made up of mostly women, historically and presently. So if you poll the average American church right now, and you looked at volunteers or givers or members, it skews women 60 to 70%. And so even if you look at the size of men's ministries nationally versus women's ministries, women's ministries tend to be larger. And there's probably some sociological components to that, right? Women on average statistically tend to be more interested in people, where men statistically tend to be more interested in things. And that's not across the board. That doesn't mean that every woman is more interested in people and every man is more interested in things. But just statistically, there is like a bit of a difference, right? So that's why you see more women who become nurses and more men who become engineers. Some of that is predicated upon just natural temperamental differences among genders. But I just think it's interesting that just at every stage of your life, trying to figure out what it means to be a male and how being a male can affect your faith, I think it's fascinating how often you talk to guys about faith or about where they are. Almost always it becomes a conversation about how they're doing, specifically to them being a male and working through male issues.
Yeah. I think it's important. I think getting to the nuts and bolts of who men are and who they aspire to be. I think there needs to be a conversation about like what we're doing tonight rather, is what does it mean to be a man, to be a force for God, and we have so many things that we can check off in categories, but I think ultimately the real question is what are the ingredients to build better relationships between men and other men and men and their partner. And I think if we get to that, we'll understand that what we believed was the boxes that needed to be checked off according to how each and every one of us was raised as men. I think we find that some of us may want to raise ourselves differently, because we may have better marriages, we may have more openness, more vulnerability, we may have more connectivity amongst other men, we may have better relationships even with our kids, and the development of how we express ourselves won't just go into things, but it will go into the things that matter more, and that's people.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. The connection between men and how healthy and important it is for males to be around other males who are headed in the same direction. Almost always when you meet somebody who is a male, you can kind of get a sense of who they are by meeting their other male friends. Right. It's really interesting. So like if they're all about family, the other males in their life will be about family. If they're about building their business, the other males in their life will be about building their business. If they're just all about smoking weed, almost always all their friends are potheads. And I think that particularly, so there's three things I want to discuss tonight, and I really want to pick your brain, just because you know so much about this. But there's three areas I kind of want to touch on, and I want to bring in scriptures to each. So the three areas is direction, responsibility, and intimacy with God. Because I think that I was just doing some kind of reflection on this today, and really thinking through what are kind of the key areas that all men need to be focusing on in terms of building their life spiritually and materially. And I think that direction is super key. You need a good aim as a male. And so that's number one. And so I want to take some time to talk about that. The second is responsibility. I think all men need responsibility. I would even go so far to say that when I meet a dude who's in like their mid 20s or whatever, I will almost like purposely try to give them responsibility because I don't think men grow unless they deal with pressure. There's something about that rising to the occasion, the kind of like the classic idea of nobility comes from that. And then finally, intimacy is so important because as men, it's very easy not to have intimacy, right? To
Yeah.
be closed off. But I kind of want to talk first about direction and kind of ask you, what do you think about that? This idea that men need direction and having a sense of purpose and having a sense of aim in your life, but also spiritually. How do you think, even psychologically, how much that affects male development?
Yeah. I think it's really important, definitely for men to find something that they're passionate about, that they love to do. I think they'll overall just be guided in a better direction, in terms of not just doing what it is, quote unquote, manly to do, but I think doing what it is that fulfills them, that brings out the best in them. And I think that sometimes men play to what society deems as a man thing to do, and they lose more and more of themselves, that part of them that may bring about the sensitive areas, their sensitivities, their emotions, their alertness, their feelings, and getting in tune with those things. I mean, I don't think anybody would call Jesus weak, but he was very in tune with his feelings, how he felt, and he wasn't afraid to show those emotions. So I think that when you find something that you're passionate about, you love, you're guided in your overall sense of direction. Your senses are heightened because of it, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And I think you can't negate any one of those areas, because all of those areas can use fine tuning. It can use pruning at times. It could be tilted and shifted, as you see fit. But if you feel you can't bring those things out in the environment you're in, then what ends up happening is those senses will be dulled, and so it may even become non-existent, and it'll be more of a what I call a shell of a man, as opposed to a full overall man that is whole in his being.
So this is really good. So basically what you're saying is that having direction or having passion is, particularly for male, is really important, because the aim, them having a particular aim, having something to struggle against, having like a battle to be won, so to speak, but there being a particular thing that they feel competent at, and them feeling like, okay, I'm passionate about this. I'm not only willing to do the work, but I also, this is something I like. And if I like it, that means I'm going to excel in this. And so having a sense of excellingness is super important, because I think males particularly, they need to win some. And so every male needs a part of their life that they're winning in. And it gives you that sense of confidence. And so when you talk about being a whole male, what you're essentially talking about is reaching your potential as a male. And so like a whole man is a man who's manifested his potential in every area. So he's reached his male potential in a relationship. He's striving in his career. He's involved as a leader in his church. And so we would you would essentially describe that as like living a whole life. And that starts with a sense of passion and direction, versus the alternative is a male who doesn't have that passion, which means they don't have direction fundamentally, and then they're not striving in any particular area. And that lack of striving creates a shell of a male, which is basically either like an adult boy, right? Or a male who's like doesn't have any success anywhere. And then it's like, well, their home life isn't great. They're not really making any, like in the marketplace, they're really struggling, and like they're so overwhelmed that they can't serve and be a leader locally in the church.
Because see, what I really see with men is that part of the reason that you find a lot of men go into things. You mentioned engineering and stuff like that. What could happen being a shell of a man is that you're passionate about something, or something's bothering you. You can't connect with people, and so you're pouring all of your thoughts and your feelings into things, and not really able to explain the meaning behind it. You're just you become someone that's just doing things and building things, and not really able to explain what your how this is how you're attached to this. How does this how is this presenting the best parts of yourself? And so I think the passion for why you do something should be explainable. It should be something that you're able to talk about. And if you're just doing things and you're not connected to it with any sense of passion, you're not a part of something that is bringing out, cultivating those areas of your life, then you're pretty much just doing it. It becomes like robotic. And so I find that's happening a lot. And for example, I was just having a conversation with somebody, and they were telling me about in disciplining their kids, what a man is supposed to do. Like, you're not supposed to cry, or for example, if a kid's playing, my wife and I were watching something the other day. If a kid's playing with a doll, they were out in public, and basically the person that was just watching this kid with the doll was basically saying, you should get a transformer or something. And the mistake is that speaking into something that you don't really understand, it's not necessarily something at that early age a kid can thoroughly understand.
Yeah.
You're trying to make a boy into a man, but the boy doesn't understand why you're telling him he can't play with the doll. But if we look at it psychologically, the doll in many people's lives presents a sense of guidance. We're talking about direction. A doll is looked at as a source for guidance. Through that doll, there could be protection. Through that doll, there can be communication that is the mediator between you and an actual person that you feel that you can't talk to, but yet when the doll is present, you can actually, it gives you this sense of confidence that you can actually express yourself. And so in that case, it was boys should play with transformers.
Yeah.
Basically taking the power away from something. So the person couldn't even see that. But to comment on the child doing that means that they were brought up with something that they became disconnected from.
Yeah, you bring up something really interesting that I kind of want to expand and then have you kind of speak to. Toxic masculinity is a very hot topic today, and it's interesting how different generations of men tend to talk about the issue, right? And so what you're touching on is toxic masculinity, that there are certain archetypes that socially we hold to that men and women should kind of follow, right? Mm-hmm. So one example would be men feel pressure that they have to be strong in all instances. Mm-hmm. And so a male who's going through a really tough time might have kind of like a view of masculinity that's quite toxic, because instead of talking about his issues with his friends or his spouse or a therapist, he's in his mind, he's thinking he's less of a male because he's being honest about where he is and what he's dealing with. And so that archetype is toxic masculinity. Or you might see a male, like I just watched a video the other day of these like two dudes at a bar, and like one totally decked the other, and it was this big story in the Midwest. And you get that sense of like toxic masculinity, this sense that if someone like comes up to you and challenges you, that you have to get in a physical altercation. And you can kind of see it because the boys are like 19, 18. So they're working from a view of masculinity that is pushing them towards responding in kind of like a weird way, like something you would see in a movie, right? And there's a lot of toxic aspects to that. And so essentially what you're saying is that that's something that we need to really think about.
Yeah.
And the example that you made was like a male kid growing up, is how do we, like, in terms of parenting, but also on a societal level, like how do we let individual people who happen to be men be themselves, and allow them to be uniquely them, because it's not a spectrum. All men are not the same. So we're everywhere. So how do you kind of, how do we disband toxic masculinity, but also how do we talk about masculine values that are healthy?
Yeah.
And what do those look like?
And I think it definitely it goes back to the stages of development. When you're a child, you're at that stage of development where you're pretty much told what to do and you really don't have much say so. But I think that allowing a boy to become a man in his fullness is there has to be a dropping of the fear. I believe that when, you know, parents that may fear that, oh my gosh, my boy's playing with dolls, they have a fear. And to be able to address that fear, because it may not even be that.
Yeah.
And what could you stop that a kid already knows? There takes a sense of guidance. So there could be a conversation versus just cutting off something. Out of that sense of fear, I believe things get cut off, and you become reactionary. But I believe one of the reasons why you see so many women in the church thriving, a lot of the times where women are thriving, men are really intimidated to actually go in the same place, almost like there's a competition. But I grew up around strong women, and and I know you as well. Exactly. Yeah. And so there's no intimidation when a woman is smart, or she can express herself, or she can do a lot of things that maybe better than some men can do.
Yeah, it's hard to be a chauvinist when you've had a strong mother.
Exactly.
You never existed in a world where a woman wasn't able to contend and in full equality and capability.
Yeah.
And so chauvinism almost is like a weird.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And so you mentioned archetype, and what ends up happening is that, women come into this world with a sense of intuition and determination. And so for so long, if we deprive the women of that, it's happened, but it's happened to gain an upper hand. And so now young boys coming up, they grow up and they see that male dominance. And I believe where you have this male dominance, you also are suppressing something that needs to show itself. And so I think when you allow someone to be who they are, then you're allowing them to reach areas that they haven't reached yet. And so if you're weak in some areas, you become strong in some areas, because you now have this sense of openness versus being fearful that you actually are without something.
Totally. This is a good conversation, because there's something I've thought quite a bit about just as a male and as a pastor, and the way that we talk about masculinity from a biblical point of view, right, and from a Christian standpoint. And I would love to kind of get your sense on this. And we've had conversations about it, so I'd love kind of what you think. And I guess the way I kind of like assess it is that there are what we'd call traditional male archetypes on the way that kind of men should function. And I would say that there's a, how do I say this? So if you kind of take it apart, and again, from a psychological standpoint, there's like part of it's toxic in that the archetypes are designed, some of them are designed in such a way where they limit the ability for men to be men by saying that only one version of masculinity is the ideal one. Right? And so one example of that is that a male archetype is that men, again, don't have emotions, right? Or can't commit to women, for instance. Like the committing to women is an interesting one because there's a lot of psychological studies that suggest that men actually know sooner if they're going to marry their wives than women. Even though the stereotype is the opposite direction, the data shows that if you poll men earlier in relationships, men tend to know quicker that they want to marry someone than their female counterpart. Psychologically speaking, men and women are more the same than they're different. So, for instance, the idea that women are emotional, men or more stoic, isn't necessarily psychologically true. That by and large, men and women are mostly the same, and there's a lot of overlap. But statistically, on the aggregate, the different genders bend towards different areas. So women tend to be a little bit more agreeable on average than men, right? It's like a 60-40 split. So men and women are mostly the same. So I think it's really healthy to be able to have a view of masculinity that allows for the difference across the board. And the second thing, though, I also think that men really need a strong sense of direction, responsibility, and values. Because I think a male with no responsibility is a recipe for disaster. And so traditional forms of like playing sports and growing up and taking care of family and being a provider, I think that functionally speaking, those are calls to responsibility. And so we know psychologically that responsibility is a very good thing on people because it forces them to kind of get there. And so one of the things that I am interested in as a 31-year-old male who happens to be a Christian and a pastor is how do we create a Christian way to talk about masculinity that is critical of the toxic parts of it. And is focused on not using Christian language to enforce toxic aspects of like submission and domination that we see. But also, how do we also set men up to succeed by saying, hey, there are specific things to your gender that are meaningful, and like, yes, you got to step up, you got to take responsibility, you have to kind of reach your male potential. Do you kind of get what I'm getting at?
It's a conversation that needs to be had, and I believe the way we enter in would be actually reading the Bible for all it's worth. I mean, to not sound so cliche, but the truth is that you can't take part of a scripture and drop off the ending. You can't take one verse and say this applies to me, but the second verse or the previous verse doesn't. You got to take the whole context. And if we talk about the context of a man in the male archetype, what you end up having is you have a man trying to be a man in order to be accepted in the society or the environment that he lives in, versus just standing to be a human being. And a human being will now be able to say, okay, you know what, I can ask for my wife to be submissive, but I also can be submissive at times when I need to be. And so to really have that balance in life versus just saying, no, this is what a man does, I'm not going to do that. What ends up happening is when you get into that way of thinking, then your ability to respond and be responsible, as you were talking about, is a more difficult task, because now what we have is that you have a lot of women that are taking the bull by the horns, and they are able to run businesses, have businesses, do certain things. And you have men that might be stay-at-home fathers, but are struggling to do those things because in their mind, they've been told that all their life that a man provides, does this, that, and the third. But I think if you get caught in that thinking, then are we saying it is more important for me to provide than doing what I need to do as a male team member with my wife in order to make this marriage work? So it's now getting past what are the Stonehenge principles and
Yeah.
saying, okay, I have to be a little bit more pliable in order to really work in this dynamic, this family dynamic, this workplace environment. It's calling for men to be human beings and not just a male archetype that has cut off all of these things that a man is supposed to be and not supposed to be.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot of good points. It kind of reminds me of, and this might be a good segue into like the scripture of the night, but Jesus is obviously a male, quite literally. And when he goes about the first century speaking about the kingdom of God and taking a real leadership role as a human being, but also as a male, you really get it's interesting how he inverts like a lot of the things that we would think about as being traditionally male archetypes. So like one example is Jesus came to serve, not be served.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of falls in the face of a traditional male archetype of male leadership that doesn't require service.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what you're talking about, is that a male might be in a position in a relationship with someone or in a church or in a different season of life where they have to serve. Mm-hmm. So they have to kind of take a serving oriented approach for a season and not be the lead singer. I always think of Chris Rock, when he talks about, he says being in a relationship is like being in a band. He goes, sometimes you're on tambourine, but sometimes you're lead singer. And I've always adored that, because that's like really true in relationships. Sometimes you're the lead singer, but sometimes you're on tambourine. Yeah. And no one likes a sad tambourine player.
Right.
And so Jesus comes as the king of all creation. So he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so when he shows up as king to dispense his kingly ability, so he's the definition of what a king should look like, because he's the King of Kings. And so when the King of Kings shows up and then he looks at people around him and he acts, he sees the highest ideal as servanthood.
Yeah.
And that's an inversion of the way that we often think of what leadership is. That leadership is about being on stage, or to be a male is about being the head. And there's like a cultural thinking on that. But Jesus says, no, to be the head means to be the tail.
Yeah.
To be the head means to serve first.
Yeah.
And that's a heck of an inversion.
It is. And it makes you wonder. I mean, I literally have questions. I mean, are you not a man or less than a man because you're on drums and not on tambourine, or not at the microphone singing as the soloist? Are you less of a man? You know, when I was a kid, I looked for my dad to cry in front of me so that I can know that it's okay for me to do it. I looked desperately. I could remember, as I'm explaining this, that I would look for that emotion and I didn't find it. And so for the longest time, I didn't cry as a man, because it was that I was taught that, what are you crying about? I'll give you something to cry about if you keep crying. And so now it was like, okay, I was more afraid of that than I was showing my emotion. So then it gets suppressed. And I think that is what's really happening. Like, are you less of a man? Because I mean, now at the drop of a dime, in worship, I could be crying. And for anything, I could be crying. And I feel even stronger afterwards because I've released it. versus just being someone that has kept it so tight. If my, or my wife serving him, and she's doing all of these leading things, and yet I feel like I can't go in behind that because you know what? I don't want to be a part of it because my wife can't be ahead of me. She can't be doing more than me. She can't, and it's that competition that really confronts and conflicts the things within us as men.
Yeah.
And I believe we have a duty as men in that responsibility we talk about to look at how Jesus was leading and to show that, wait, this next generation is following behind. Whatever is said or not said, kids are a lot smarter than you think. They are tracking everything. They're watching face expressions, what you do when you do it. I mean, even more so in quarantine, they're up close and personal with you as parents. And so as a man, it is so important to really just to embody that all of these things are human characteristics. It's human nature, and it should not be suppressed because it's going to show itself and maybe even rear its ugly head in areas that you really will be surprised that it shows up because it hasn't been expressed.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because the last image of Jesus before he goes to the cross is at the Garden of Gethsemane, and there's a very interesting moment there because he goes to the Father, right, and he in prayer and he cries and literally sweats blood because he's under so much pressure. And there's this moment of intimacy where Jesus basically asks the Father, "Is this what I got to do?" And you see, I think, two interesting things there. So the first is you see a ability for him to truly be vulnerable, and he's God on earth, yet he's in perfect relationship with his Father. Well, perfect relationship requires intimacy.
Yeah.
It requires you to be vulnerable. And so that means you have to cast off ego.
Yeah.
And you have to cast off fear.
Yeah.
And so Jesus does that. He's able to be fully vulnerable and open himself up fully to his Father. So that's number one. And you see it and it's, Jesus wept. That's the idea that God wept, God weeping. He fully opens himself up.
Yeah.
I think is a great example for us as men. And at the same time, even with him fully opening himself up, it's through that courage to voluntarily open himself. He also voluntarily takes on the responsibility of what it means to be the Messiah.
Yeah.
And so his very next act of ultimate vulnerability is ultimate sacrifice. And I think about this a lot because there's in the New Testament, there's a comment about how, wives submit to their husbands and husbands kind of submit to their wives. And the idea that the kind of the traditional archetype is that men should, lead the head of the home like Jesus led. And that sounds all kind of great, but if you actually take a look at that, that's a pretty huge responsibility because we'll lead like Jesus led. So that means to be fully vulnerable. Well, that's a heck of a challenge.
Yeah.
And lead like Jesus leads as a male. That means to have a servant heart first. That means to be sacrificial above all else. That means to do what needs to be done so you might lift up the family. These are not ego-driven moves. These are not things that push a male towards thinking of himself as like a strong man, put people down, ego. This is the opposite. This is like a taking apart of those traditional archetypes and almost finding like a truer masculinity, one that's built on service, responsibility, vulnerability, one that's built on love, one that's built on taking seriously the people around them and being willing to truly get in the game and to kind of work past and dispense whatever fears they might have.
You bring up a really good point, and I know there's probably some men watching that's like, why do I need to show this publicly? Why do I need to be vulnerable, just so you can see it?
Yeah.
What it does is it's not necessarily for anybody else. I mean, it is, but it's really for you, because truth of the matter is that if you're pained enough, if you're pressured enough, you're crying or becoming vulnerable behind closed doors anyway. Yeah. And so what ends up happening, you mentioned ego, and really you always want to know where the ego's at in the room. Yeah. You're in the room with other men, with other people. You want to know where your ego is at, because what will end up happening is it'll creep right up and just catch you. It'll just catch you how you'll try to cover up an aspect of yourself because you don't want to be seen. And that is the importance of that vulnerability, that release. It's basically saying, I'm without any hindrances, walls, barriers, anything that's preventing me from allowing whatever needs to flow out of me. If it needs to be service, if it needs to be love, if I need to say something that's sentimental, I am doing it free from any judgment of what any man is thinking makes me more or less than a man.
Yeah.
To do it privately means you're not possibly able to even show it publicly, Yeah.
No, you bring up, I just want to touch on this point because I think people might miss it. You're essentially saying that, I just love that idea that the process of vulnerability and the process of responsibility, all these kind of values we're talking about, it's not only good for the people around you, but it's the best way for you to live. Mm-hmm. It's deeply good for you. Mm-hmm. And, toxic masculinity not only is not great mm-hmm. for the people in your life, but it is not good for you mm-hmm. because it's, not to be able to be vulnerable and talk about how you're doing and what you're doing from a psychological standpoint, and this is well documented. What it does is it hinders you as a human mm-hmm. to be able to actually speak to whatever's causing you an issue. Mm-hmm. So, like, if you can't admit that something's tough, good luck changing it. Right. And so maybe the way to think about it, kind of in a reversal way, is you can't be the strong male who's capable and who can contend with the world without the vulnerability. Like, you don't get the cross without the garden. Yeah. Like, you don't get Jesus's ability to take on the sins of the world and to meet the moment without truly being able to open oneself and be honest. Yeah. And they're directly connected. And they come in that order. You got the garden first, and then you got the hero's journey. But you don't get the cross without the garden.
And I see it so much. And men have to be able to talk to one another, but I think that they first have to be able to walk around inside their own home within, and not feel that there's so many doors that's not open to them. You create less space for yourself within. And so now you're treading lightly in conversations, things that you want to be able to say. You really want to be able to reach out for help. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's tough for men to reach out for help, because they're essentially saying they need something. But I mean, I think, again, that's a human quality, human nature to need things. And if people are, if you're saying, this brother is your friend, these people love you, care about you, but yet they don't know ways that they can be there for you because you can't be truthful and honest with them. It does a disservice in our relationships. It's gone too long. If there's one thing that quarantine has really taught me, it's gone too long for men to not be able to connect, speak what's on their heart, be able to be vulnerable, be able to reach out, say, I need this, I need help in that, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. And you know, it just defeats the purpose. I mean, you know, because this is what we're here for.
Yeah.
You know, this is what we're here for.
It's almost like we have to fight against the myth of a self-made man.
Yeah.
And to quote the great Cornel West, he says, I am not self-made. I am a representation of everyone who loved me. You know, I am the love of my mother and the love of my teachers and the love of my aunts and my uncles, all of us, every single person. I really believe this. Nobody is self-made, despite the cultural myth we have.
Yeah.
Self-made person.
Yeah.
And you see it everywhere, whether you're Malcolm Gladwell or whether you're the Bible. No one is self-made. We are a product of the people that loved us.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is just really important to always know, is that as males, we are the product of people that loved us, of men who spoke in our lives, of women who spoke in our lives. And so we have a responsibility and the capability to see other people, particularly men around us, also become the product of our love and support.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's exactly what you're hitting on.
I really believe that women watch, and we mentioned that this will be good whether you're single in a relationship or whatnot. I really believe that women, you guys play a vital role in also helping the men develop and get to this place we're talking about, this balance in life that just is not saying, hey, I'm just this manly man that is tough in every area of my life, and there's no sense of sensitivity, weakness, vulnerability, anything. First of all, I just want to dispel that myth. Since we're talking about myths, women don't think that's sexy. It's not, you know, they don't. And I feel like we play this role that we believe that women want to hear, to have, they want to behold. It's not it. It's really not it. My wife told me just yesterday, she said, you know, the sexiest thing about you is your ability to open up and be vulnerable and share what's on your heart, some of the deep things that when we first met, I couldn't do that. I really couldn't do that. It was like this wall that was like, it was there. I just unconsciously didn't know it was there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just with her. I walked around with this movable wall that says that I could get close. You could get close to me, but you can only get so far.
Yeah.
And you see what I mean? And now be able to have myself just, here I am, you know, there's nothing to prove and there's nothing to lose. And I think that is the key right there, realizing there's nothing to prove and I really have nothing to lose. And if I show up, I think a true, you know, definition of a whole man is to be able to show up in any and every room and still be yourself.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
I mean, yeah, you're talking about intimacy and character.
Mm-hmm.
To have integrity is to be honest, and you know, to be able to be honest and to be truthful and open yourselves up is the definition of intimacy.
Yeah.
And that's what it means to be present.
Yeah.
I think more than anything. And I think that's biblical. I think that's just the idea, and this brings up to kind of the last point, is I think men need direction, men need responsibility, but they need intimacy with God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that I just think it's so important that men know God and have that sense and know the Father, because we all need good fathers in our lives. And many of us have great fathers who are like real people, but all of us, I think, have the perfect father who is God the Father. But then also Jesus is like the brother. He's in the foxhole with us. He meets us where we're at. He loves us where we are. And being able to exercise that, I think, is just so important. And I think that's something that every male can start with. Renee brought up, Rena brought up this great question. I'd love to know what you think, Brandon. How do we set men up to succeed? That's a really great question. I think I'd love to answer it from a male standpoint, how I think men can set up other males to succeed. And then, Brandon, if you want to answer it, what you think females should do. And then we can close out.
Okay.
That would be great. So I think for men, it's very important that other men know that they're respected. And so I think that's a big thing with men, is that if you know from another dude that they respect you, I think that's huge. And so as a male, you want to find dudes who are in your lane, who are headed towards the same things as you, that know where you're coming from and respect your journey. And they'll respect you enough to support you and be on your side. They're not interested in tearing you down, because none of us are perfect. And so we're going to mess up all the time. Things are not going to work out. We're going to have issues, but a dude who truly respects you recognizes your talent and everything, all your potential, but they respect you enough to vote for you. They respect you enough to support you. They respect you enough to speak life into you. And so I think there's nothing more important for a male, that it's just so important that you need to get around other guys who see you as valuable, who are willing to kind of give you that vote of confidence, but also push you in a great way. But they're pushing you not because they're trying to put you down. They're pushing you because it's like, dude, I know what you got. Like, I know who you are. We're peers. And talk to me, man. Like, what are you up to? What are you doing? How are you feeling? And like, what can I do to support you? Because I think you really got it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I honestly, I mean, I would take that same word respect into the how, you know, women can really help men be set up for success. And the respect area, it looks a little bit different. You want to create that atmosphere that a man feels comfortable being his true authentic self. You know, a man won't, and my wife does a great job at this. I feel like the reinforcing what I see in you, because no human being sees themselves. And so in the same way with men, we don't see ourselves, and some men might carry into the relationship this facade. And so to be able to speak to who that man is without putting him down, without making him feel less than a man, but really just highlighting the things you value most about him. Sometimes even doing what Pastor Tim says, is speaking to what it is that you don't see, but you've seen glimpses of, and you know that it's in there.
Totally.
Help that man get to that point, because what it ends up doing is eventually, and this is why labels were created, because what's labeled gets fit in that category. In the same way, if you're talking down to the man, if you're saying he's not doing this, he's not doing that, men miss that. And so the communication is what you would like, you know, him to do. I mean, I love it when men want to feel needed. I love it when my wife says, it's not like, hey, do you want to go on a walk? Do you want to go on a walk? No. Do you want to go on a walk with me? Yes. It's such a difference. It's the most, you know?
100%. Yeah. I love that, because, you know, I talk, you know, whenever I talk to women, they always say the same thing. Men are complicated. They're not. Dude,
No.
not complicated. What's complicated is that girls overthink that there's more going on, when really it's like second gear.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
they're thinking there's 5 gears, and it's like, no, it's 2. So you're talking about this in a perfect way. You're saying, look, like, when a dude knows that the person he's with really believes in him through thick and thin, and if they're committed, if they truly believe that, and that's like the core of it, then when they are challenged, they know it's coming from a place where, okay, she's not tearing me down. She believes in me so much that she's reminding me I could do better.
Yes.
And that is like, it's so healthy that, men think that way.
Yeah.
And so that's good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So women, be intentional. And then I would say men, same, have date nights, dudes. Like, build your life and think of Jesus. Serve. He came to serve, to be a servant. And it's amazing how far you will get in your life, particularly as a male, when you set your ego aside and you just go to work and you add value everywhere you go. It's just amazing how doors will open for you.
Yeah.
So awesome. So I just want to give a couple shout outs, and then Brandon, I'd love you if you close this out. People ask us all the time. They say, Pastor Stefan, we love the Congregation family. We love all the content. We love what's happening. I think I want to support. I think I want to be a part of the church. I think I want to take the next step and partner with you guys. So you can do two things. The first thing you can do is, if you want to find out more information, Congregation.Family, check us out. Two, if you're a person that says, hey, I want to partner with you guys financially in some way, we always give a shout out, Congregation.Family/give, or you could text Congregation Church to 77977. So what a privilege it is to be a pastor, but also a Christian and a human being. I tell people about this a lot, that the Congregation family, this is not a company. This is not an organization where there's a CEO and shareholders. It's not for profit. The word church literally means people called together. And so that's what we are. The Congregation family is literally a family of folks that God has brought us together so we can pour into each other, so we can learn discipleship, live our purposes, and give back impact, and be God's love letter to the world, to quote Paul. And so I just want to thank Brandon. I always love talking to you, man. Every time we chat, I just want to go and have dinner. So we got to do it soon after we get our vaccines. Shout out to Joseph Mendoza, who got his vaccine today. For those of you who are able to get it, go get your vaccine. People are getting vaccinated like crazy, and that's a good thing. And so if you're over 65, check it out. March 15th. Everyone else is going to be getting it. So, don't not get it. Abby's laughing at me. Go get a vaccine. It's a good thing. Just could you just pray us out real quick, Brandon?
Yeah. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for all of us that's just gathered here, that are live, that will be watching. I just pray a special blessing, particularly over the men, but to everybody watching, Lord. I just pray that you help us to be able to get to that place that you are calling us to, Lord, to just get us to that place where you brought your son Jesus to, and that it be a threshold that will just open up all of the things that you've placed in us to be able to better communicate, to be able to be more vulnerable, open with our brothers and sisters, and in our relationships, in our families. God, I just pray that you just continue to keep your hand over each and every family. Lord, keep us safe, watch over us. Lord, even over the congregation, the pastors, God, that you continue to just keep building this church one stone at a time, God. Also being able to speak to those that are watching, God, that you've placed gifts within them that you did not call for them to just sit dormant, but God, that you are really just stirring something up, an idea, something where they feel like they can just get involved, and they find that their place is here at the Congregation family. Lord, we just pray that you begin to give them the courage to be able to just step into it. We give you all the honor and praise, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I love you, buddy. Thank you for joining me. You are an amazing guest, as always. Thank you for everyone else who joined us tonight. And we will see you guys coming up on Sunday morning. God bless.